Did you know that deep in the humid forests of Thailand and Brazil there exists a fungus so precise, so patient, and so utterly merciless that it has been quietly orchestrating mass murder for nearly 50 million years, turning living creatures into puppets of flesh long before the first humans ever walked the earth? And the most chilling part is that it doesn't kill its victims quickly, it hijacks them, steers them, and uses their own bodies as launching pads to claim hundreds more, all with a kind of clockwork timing that should not be possible in nature. Consider the carpenter ant, an insect going about its ordinary life on the forest floor, when a single microscopic spore lands on its body and germinates, sending fungal threads creeping inward, threading through the ant's muscles and flooding its system with chemicals that begin to override its very will. And over the following days the ant stops behaving like an ant at all, abandoning its colony, wandering away from the trails it has known its entire life, climbing in a direction it would never normally choose, driven by an intelligence that is no longer its own. What scientists have discovered is that this ascent ends at an almost unbelievably specific place, because the infected ant climbs to a height of roughly 25 centimeters above the forest floor, no higher and no lower. And it does this because that precise band of the understory holds the perfect microclimate for the fungus to thrive, a sweet spot where the temperature hovers between 20 and 30 degrees Celsius and the humidity stays high enough to nourish what is about to erupt. And there, at that exact altitude, the ant clamps its mandibles onto the central vein of a leaf in what researchers eerily call the death grip, locking its jaws with such finality that it will never let go. But the timing is what truly defies belief. Because the ant performs this fatal bite at almost exactly solar noon, when the sun sits highest in the sky. As though the fungus carries an internal clock synchronized to the rotation of the planet itself, and then, after biting, the ant lingers, still alive, still gripping, for around 6 more hours until it finally dies as the light fades, the fungus having timed the entire execution down to the hour. And the ant does not die alone, because these victims cluster together in what can only be described as graveyards, hidden pockets of the forest where hundreds upon hundreds of dead ants hang frozen mid-bite on leaves and twigs, all suspended in that same narrow zone of perfect temperature and moisture, a silent cemetery of mind-controlled corpses curated by something that has no eyes, no brain, and no mercy, only the relentless logic of survival refined across an almost incomprehensible span of time. And we know it is ancient because the fossil record holds the proof. Leaves preserved in stone from 48 million years ago bearing the unmistakable scars of the death grip, the very same bite marks left by infected insects in the deep past, meaning this gruesome ritual was already perfected when our distant primate ancestors were small creatures scurrying through prehistoric canopies, and it has continued, unbroken and unchanged, ever since. What makes the fungus even more unsettling is its specialization, because there is not one Cordyceps but more than 600 distinct species, and each one has evolved to target a single specific kind of insect, one tuned to a particular ant, another to a particular beetle, moth, or spider, each a master assassin honed for one victim and one victim only, a vast hidden army of specialists waging silent war throughout the insect world. And once the ant has bitten down and died in its appointed place, the true horror unfolds, because the fungus does not merely feed on the corpse. It methodically replaces the ant's internal tissue with its own fungal cells, consuming the muscles and organs and converting them into more of itself while somehow preserving the outer shell and keeping the structure intact, essentially hollowing out the creature and rebuilding it from the inside as a fungal organism wearing an ant's armor. And then comes the finale, the moment everything has been building toward, when a single slender stalk bursts upward directly out of the dead ant's head, rising like a tiny grotesque tree, and from its tip it releases a fine rain of spores that drift down onto the forest floor below, onto the very trails where healthy ants still march, seeding the next generation of victims and beginning the entire cycle of possession and death all over again. It is a strategy so nightmarish and so cinematic that it became the inspiration for the wildly popular video game and television series The Last of Us, which imagined a mutated cordyceps leaping to humans and collapsing civilization. And while that scenario gripped millions with terror, the reassuring truth is that we are almost certainly safe, because the fungus is exquisitely adapted to the cool internal temperatures of insects, and the human body simply runs too hot, our warmth acting as a natural shield that the fungus, for all its ancient cunning, has never learned to overcome. yet humans have found another relationship with this organism entirely, because high in the thin cold air of the Himalayas grows Cordyceps sinensis, a species that infects ghost moth larvae buried in the soil. And it is so prized in traditional medicine that harvesters scour the mountains for it, and it can sell for more than $20,000 per kilogram. Making this parasitic fungus literally worth more than its weight in gold, a treasure born from death dug out of the roof of the world. And perhaps the most astonishing twist of all is how the ants themselves have begun to fight back, because healthy members of a colony can somehow detect when one of their own has been infected, sensing the invisible enemy growing within their nestmate. And rather than risk an outbreak that could doom the entire colony, they will physically pick up the infected individual and carry it far, far away from the nest, an act of cold biological calculation, sacrificing one to save the many, a tiny quarantine performed by creatures with brains smaller than a grain of sand. And so this is the world that exists just beneath our notice, a forest floor that is also a battlefield, where an ancient brainless fungus has spent 48 million years perfecting the art of mind control, timing its kills to the position of the sun, sculpting graveyards at precise altitudes, hollowing out the living and turning them into spore cannons, evolving 600 specialized assassins, and forcing even its victims' families to make terrible choices, all of it unfolding silently, endlessly, right under our feet, a reminder that nature's imagination for horror runs far deeper and far stranger than anything we could ever invent. Deep in the humid shadows of a tropical rainforest, a single spore drifts through the air, smaller than a speck of dust, carrying within it one of nature's most horrifying biological weapons, and when it finally settles onto the back of an unsuspecting carpenter ant, the nightmare begins, because this is no ordinary fungus, this is Ophiocordyceps, the so-called zombie fungus, and it does not simply kill its host, it enslaves it. The spore clings to the ant's exoskeleton and begins to germinate, secreting enzymes that dissolve the tough outer armor like acid eating through metal. Then it pushes a thread-like filament called a hypha straight through the breach and into the living tissue beneath, and from this moment the ant is already doomed, though it doesn't know it yet, and it will continue marching, foraging, and serving its colony for days while an invader quietly spreads through its body. What makes Cordyceps so terrifyingly efficient is its restraint, because instead of devouring its victim all at once, the fungus feeds with surgical patience, consuming only the non-vital tissues first, the fat reserves and soft organs that keep the ant moving, while deliberately keeping the heart, the nervous system, and the muscles intact, because a dead ant is useless to it. It needs the host alive and mobile right up until the final act. As the fungal network blooms inside the body, it begins releasing a cocktail of chemicals that flood the ant system, hijacking its behavior with chilling precision. And here is the detail that has stunned scientists for years. Recent research suggests the fungus may not even need to physically invade the brain itself, instead it weaves a three-dimensional lattice of cells around the ant's muscle fibers, essentially wiring itself directly into the host's body and seizing control of its movements like a puppeteer pulling strings, turning the insect into a living marionette of flesh and chitin. Then comes the climb, the eerie phenomenon known as summit disease, when the infected ant, against every survival instinct it has, abandons its colony and begins crawling upward, driven by chemical commands it cannot resist, climbing a stem or a leaf until it reaches a very specific height, often around 25 centimeters above the forest floor, where the temperature and humidity are absolutely perfect for the fungus to thrive. And at this elevated spot, at solar noon, the ant performs its final act under the fungus's control. It clamps its mandibles down onto the central vein of a leaf in what biologists chillingly call the death grip, locking its jaws with such force that they will never open again, anchoring the corpse in place even after the ant takes its last breath, and there it dies, fused to the leaf, a tombstone made of its own body. Over the following days, something straight out of a horror film unfolds. The fungus consumes what remains inside and then erupts, pushing a long, alien stalk straight out of the back of the ant's head, a stem that grows skyward and swells into a bulbous fruiting body, and from this grotesque spire it rains thousands of fresh spores down onto the forest floor below, onto the very trails where other ants march, beginning the cycle of infection all over again. And this is no recent evolutionary trick, because we have found fossilized evidence of the death grip preserved in a leaf dating back 48 million years, meaning this fungus has been puppeteering insects since long before humans ever existed, perfecting its craft across millions of years of evolution. Today there are more than 400 known species of cordyceps, and what's astonishing is that each one is a specialist, finely tuned to hijack a single type of host. One species targets ants, another spiders, another caterpillars or beetles, each a master key cut precisely for one lock. Which leads to the question that has haunted scientists and inspired video games and television shows alike: could it ever evolve to infect us? And here is the comforting truth: our body temperature runs far too hot. For these fungi to survive, our advanced immune systems would obliterate them, and the evolutionary leap required to jump from an insect's simple nervous system to a complex human brain is staggeringly improbable. But researchers warn that as the planet warms, fungi are slowly adapting to higher temperatures, and while a true zombie outbreak remains firmly in the realm of fiction, the unsettling reality is that nature already invented mind control, perfected it on a massive scale, and has been quietly running its puppet show beneath our feet for tens of millions of years.